All right, we'll get started here in just a minute or so. All right, everyone, 8 o'clock. I know we've got some more people that will join, but in the interest of your time for being here, I want to make sure we get going. Appreciate your attention tonight. Welcome. My name is Chris Facati. I am actually one of the facilitators here on Jennifer's team, and unfortunately, JD is out again tonight. So I'm going to fill in and take you through pages 153 through 191 of Unit 1. Let me go ahead and give you my email address. Should you have any questions about what we discussed tonight or just anything in general in your cert prep course, please feel free to reach out. A little bit of history about me. I always think it's good, good to know, who's teaching you and why. I spent 31 years in the telecom industry and the cable side, and I was in large executive roles. The first half of my career I spent building large sales, marketing, customer service operations. And I really had two good mentors early on in my career that showed me the importance of putting, my team and people at the center of everything I did and taking care of them. And the industry at the time was kind of a ready, shoot, aim industry. It was just wild. And unfortunately, people were really just a means to an end and an afterthought for most. And I really took that advice to heart and did a lot of things from an employee engagement perspective, training and development, right? The things that we're covering here, and had a lot of success with that. And so I spent the last 16 years of my career, the second half in HR, doing just about everything with the exception of like HRIS or analytics. I had people who could do that, but talent management, talent development, recruiting, HRBP, to really try to bring some of those people-focused strategies to organizations. And I did it on a corporate structure, so influenced large sales teams, what have you. So had a great career there. Back in 2019, I was getting ready to leave the industry at the end of the year, ready to do part two, right? Just had been doing it forever and said, I need to get my certification. And something I've always wanted to do, never did it. And so I went through the exact same course that you're going through here. And I really credit, right, the structure, the methodology, this with helping me pass both my SPHR and my SHRM SCP. I think I finished class on Wednesday and I took my SPHR that following Saturday. And then I took the SCP 2 months later, the first weekend of December. So I had a chance to call Jennifer afterwards and said, I just really appreciate, your course. And if you've got any new classes, I'd love to just speak to them about what the experience was. And that turned into an opportunity to come and teach. And part of why I'm doing this is I really do want to give back to others, right? This has been, a gift for me. And, I've got a bit of a unique perspective with so long in the telecom industry on the business side and then on the people side. Right, I can connect those dots between this is what the business says, here's what they really need, or how to talk in that language. So unfortunately, JD's still under the weather. So I just wanted to spend, a few minutes with you tonight and be diligent about your time going through what we're going to start with ethics in Unit 1. For those of you, that maybe you don't know, or if this is just repeat, I'll give it to you. For PHR and SPHR candidates, really CP and SCP, this one is either, Unit 1 is either your biggest or your second biggest element on the test. And then for those groups, Unit 5, right, for SPHR and SCP, Unit 1's the big one, 5 second. For PHR, CP, Unit 5 is the most weighted on the test, Unit 1 second. So, think about everything that we're looking at here, right, tonight, and you're looking at Unit 1 in terms of the strategy that organizations are trying to do, and then look at Units 2, 3, and 4 under the guise of what you learn in 1. Sometimes it can be a bit intimidating for folks, but it is really that important. So I think when I went through the test, read Unit 1 and Unit 5 like 3 times, took the tests multiple times, and I felt really, really well prepared. So there's a lot of detail you're going to see in 2, 3, and 4, but no, the heavy weighting comes out of Unit 1 and Unit 5. So a little bit about me, really anxious. I live in Columbia, South Carolina, where we actually had an earthquake today, 3.3 of the Richter scale. And it's very rare for us. And sitting here, my chair rattled upstairs. So kind of disconcerting there. So yeah, any questions about anything on Unit 1 or the process or anything before we get started tonight? Just go ahead and pop it in chat if you want, or just come off mute and ask them. Doesn't matter, we got a small group. All right, I'll take silence as we're good. I'll keep an eye on the chat and we'll go ahead. Hey, Joey, we'll go ahead and thanks for joining. We'll go ahead and we'll get started here tonight. So you're following along in your book, page 153. We start with ethics, and I think this is just one of those really interesting slippery slope things in terms of looking at it from a business perspective. And I'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. So 3 things, learning objectives, right, that we want to cover. We want to compare and contrast ethics and morality, then identify where each exists in HR practices and policies, list and describe conflicts of interest, and there can be many of them, and provide examples of corporate social responsibility. While that's not a big section, I have seen that come up really in the last 2 years, a lot of questions on corporate social responsibility in the exam. So, please be prepared to look at that. So I'll start with a question. You can just, type it in chat. What do you think HR's role is regarding ethics in the organization? Are we the ones that should create the ethics process and policy, or is it something that we should help be a part of as a larger fabric in an organization? Not necessarily a right or wrong answer, just certainly love your perspectives. Yeah, Jennifer, be a part of, right? Help be a part of, Elizabeth. Yeah, it should be both. Yeah, right. So if you look at ethics, right, I think you're all correct. What it can't be, right, is HR is going to establish that, and then it just becomes an HR initiative, right? That really needs to be the lifeblood of the organization, that your corporate officers, right, CEO on down, and say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do this from an ethics perspective. And then from an HR perspective, we really want to make sure that everything is aligned with what we're trying to do ethically, right? So, you think about, where does ethics get tested? And you'll learn more about this when we get to Unit 5. But it's interesting, right? So let's say a company has actually not Unit 5, but Unit 1, where you're not sure if you're to that through the global, but I think you are, but we'll talk about it, right? So you got a company, you've got a no bribe, no kickback ethics policy, okay? Straightforward. All of a sudden, company A now expands into a global marketplace, and they want to get into, right, a market that's not being served, but let's say the culture of that market is not only one that tolerates kickbacks and bribes, it's actually expected as part of the course of doing business, right? Now that gets tested. Do you, right, stick to your ethics policy and say, yeah, you know what, we're not going to do business, that's not what we're for? Or now do you have 2 policies? Well, in the US, that's what we're going to do, but here that's accepted, we're going to go, right? Does the bottom line win out? I don't know. I suspect companies have done both, right? And sometimes, I always, one of the things I always tell my groups is, at the end of the day, I think the bottom line really drives a lot of bad behavior in businesses. If you look at all the legislation that we have, why is that? Because organizations were not doing what was right by employees. Pregnancy Discrimination Act, ADA, right? The Title VII, right? FMLA, right? I could go on, wage and hour, right? I could go on and on and on. We've got all these legislations because the Age Discrimination Act. Businesses were cutting corners and not doing the right things by employees. Thus, we put legislation in place to level that. So I use that in the context of, okay, where does ethics come into that, right? Not hiring somebody because they're pregnant or getting rid of them because they're pregnant because they may not, take time off from work and have higher insurance policies. Not ethical, right? Getting rid of employees over 40 because they make more money and use more insurance, right, is not an ethical policy, but businesses did it left and right. So you got to look at where's the intersection, right, of respect, integrity, honesty, and ethics. Where is it an ethics policy to say we have it, or is it actually on paper and do we live it? And I think that's where HR really then comes into play. And sometimes it's calling it tight, and many times maybe calling it tight against people, right, that should know better. So if you think then kind of go through the content here, moral actions then are just and fair, and they respect the autonomy and dignity of people, and they are perceived by rational people as being right and proper, right? The foundation then for deciding whether human resource practices are fair and just is based on an examination of the relationship between the person and then the organization. So the organization is expected to treat people morally, right? So not getting rid of people because they're pregnant or over 40 or paying them fair, yada, yada, yada. While employees then have duties of loyalty, obedience, and confidentiality, right? We see this, for example, through the employment exchange, and we'll go more of that in level 4, in unit 4, but as a company, we're paying you for XYZ talents. This is what we expect in return, kind of that agency agreement. So human resource managers then are expected to monitor the ethical practices in their companies and protect the interests of employees. Many organizational practices, they can harm employees, right? Think about, unsafe conditions, right? I mean, a host of different things. Then, and that might be like, well, what else could harm employees? Divulging, right? Sensitive personal information, right? Not a lot of that's protected by HIPAA. Might be conflict of interest, payoffs, bribes. So as HR leaders, then we often play a central role in creating a code of ethics and centers to protect employees, right? But also that has to be a broader fabric of the organization. So when you define morality, right, it is defined by the processes that occur. So that is called deontology. And if the stated consequences of those processes then is theology. So moral actions are thought to be those that are fair, socially acceptable, just, and proper. So if you look in business then, moral actions are further defined when behavior and conduct is aligned with what is deemed as acceptable by the organization trade overall. So interesting, what's acceptable to one organization may not be to another, right? Role morality then describes the mutual relationship between organization and employee, where the company is expected to treat people morally in exchange for the employee fulfills their duties with loyalty, obedience, confidentiality. So you have that traditional then employment exchange and inducements contribution balance. And this is further example of organizational morality. The employment exchange then describes the exchange an employee and employer make with one another for talent and pay. When those two elements are even, is said to be equilibrium, which is morally right. Right. So I'm going through a situation right now. I have an executive consultant during the day, work for a company. And one of my peers, I probably talked to her twice a day. She was like, Chris, I'm just not paid enough for what I do, right? So they're asking me to do X, Y, Z, and they're paying me, A, B, and C to do it. It's just not fair. And so there you've got this imbalance where she's looking at the situation as not necessarily being moral. And the consequences then is I'm unhappy, I feel taken advantage of. The company looks at it and says, we pay you really fair for what we're asking to do, right? So when you've got to make sure those types of things are in line. So when we go look at deontology, right? The compound definition of morality is based on the fundamental fairness of an action or means used to achieve the result. Company thinks that the compensation is adequate. She doesn't. But I said at the end of the day, right, you don't tell me, I'm your peer. You need to tell your boss, right, and either get it off your chest and see if you can get more money, or you need to go away, right? But just complaining about it all day, every day isn't making you happy. It's certainly not making me happy, and it's not a good state to be in. So I use that as one example. There can be a lot of friction points, right, as you go through these relationships. And again, you look at morality, right? What's moral and right for one company may not be for another. I worked for a cable operator very early on in my career. And oops, sorry, what happened? And it was right that it was a culture that really embraced staying out late, going to parties. You had to drink, had to get drunk, make a fool out of yourself, right? That was accepted. If you didn't do those things when there were get-togethers, right, then it did not fit their culture, and you were looked down upon. Other cultures, like mine now, that's the one I'm in, is that's strictly frowned upon. So again, got to figure out getting the right, and that then weaves through recruiting and talent and everybody that you bring into the organization. So, I think at the end of the day, right, we talk about ethical issues, okay, and common things that we look at from an HR perspective. So, protecting privacy in the workplace, okay, it can be, from sensitive information, right, conflict of interests. Okay, big one. Talk about that here when we get to the next slide. Ethics of technology, right? Bribes, payoffs, kickbacks, whistleblowing, deceptive practices, and forms of organizational abuse, right? That might be organizational abuse, might be discrimination, be it disparate impact, disparate treatment, what have you, right? It might be hostile work environments, right? From either maybe a sexual harassment or just horrible place to work, right? Nothing very good. So, you look at ethics, what I think runs afoul sometimes is a lot of organizations have a policy, and I think part of it is just to say they have it, but do they really follow through, right? Are they willing to have some level of less ethical behavior because it suits them in the moment or financially? And so from an HR perspective, we deal with all of it, right? We are dealing with that. I would probably say forms of organizational abuse, right? Privacy in the workplace, right? It might be ethics of use of technology, right? Using a work computer for personal things, what have you. In some places that's perfectly fine. Others, it's not. So lots of cats we need to herd here, right? And then, sometimes I think from an HR perspective, the challenge, and I always saw it, was I had to have, conversations and conflicts with sometimes senior leaders many levels up because, right, it was starting there, right? Maybe deceptive practices and how we were, comping people or running the business. And so it's not necessarily always a fun place to be, but obviously very much needed. So conflict of interest then is defined as a situation where a person who has a responsibility to act in the best interest of the company or organization may receive direct personal benefit from his or her actions at the expense or to the detriment of the organization. I'll give you a couple of examples here. When I was working in the cable industry very early on, the folks that did our install work, we hired I worked in a state, so there was like 11 offices. We had basically the entire state, and we had a new state leader come in, and we relied really heavily on contractors under this new leader, far more than what we did before. So contractors were always brought in to help with maybe those peak times or seasonal times, and we ended up kind of cutting back our workforce and using contractors like as 0.75% of our job, or 3/4 of job, which was kind of interesting. And so, as a regional manager, I'm like, this, this contract group is horrible, right? Their work quality just was bad compared to what I had seen from others. And when I was paying the invoices, I'm like, we're paying these folks nearly double what we were other contractors. I was shocked. And we all the general managers today kind of got talking about it. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. So, well, fast forward the story, we found out that the new, state manager, right, was getting kickbacks. He would bring these contract groups in, double the rates, and they were paying him then. So if an install at the time was $100, they were paying $200, giving him $100 for each job. Right? That's obviously a big conflict of interest. Article happened a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, here in one of the school boards in South Carolina, in the Columbia area. I think it was Richland 1. The head of the school board, they were looking for a law firm that dealt in this specialized law. It was like a $750,000 contract. And so they put out bids for this contract, and he awarded the contract to his wife's firm that she owned. And the bid was far greater than any of the other bids they received. And she didn't specialize in that law whatsoever. So you had really qualified firms that specialized in this particular law that had better bids that didn't win, and his wife's firm did. And so, that is obvious, now, let's call it for what it is, right? That S on his chest wasn't for Superman, and the capital S was for stupid, right? I mean, stupid man. I mean, how dumb do you think the public is? And he ended up being ousted, and they nullified the contract. But again, did he have a lot to gain from it? Yeah, absolutely. His wife got a $300,000 contract awarded for $750 in her own firm in a doesn't even do that kind of law. So those are the types of things to look for, right? And there might be smaller conflicts of interest, right? A vendor comes in and offers something. Does that make sense? Do you take it? So, oh yeah, Joy, I have too. It's sad, right? I mean, and that's where the ethics policy starts to, I always say the bottom line is king. And the more there is on the bottom line, the less ethical behavior, or the more slippery the slope will get with people. That's why we got all the legislations that we've got. So those are pretty big examples, but looking for, the smaller ones as well. And then on page 163, 165, we've got the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and this was passed after the MCI and WorldCom fiascos back in the 90s. And what the Congress people, Sarbanes and Oxley, did were they passed this legislation that now is required from that point on publicly traded companies and their independent auditors to demonstrate to the SEC that their numbers are accurate and that they have processes in place to ensure accurate reporting. So probably need to know this one for your exam as well. Remember, it was on both of mine. And so, right, it's basically what Enron and WorldCom and these other companies were cooking the books, right? They were just big shells, and the leaders were bilking the companies for billions. And so SOX implications then for human resources, right, requires companies to establish, maintain a complaint system and an anti-retaliation statement and say, hey, I don't think what we're doing here is legal. Basically a whistleblower, you can blow the whistle and not be retaliated against for that. Prohibits insider trading and requires at least 30 days advance notice to employees of blackout periods, right, and when they can and cannot trade stock. Blackout period is when you can't. Bans personal loans to members of board of directors or executive officers. Requires each annual report to contain an internal control report. Requires firms to have a code of ethics for the executive officers that is designed to deter fraud and promote financial integrity, which basically says we'll lock you up in jail, right? That's really what that sentence is reading. That you can not only be fined, you can be imprisoned, as was I'm drawing a blank on his name, but the head of Enron. Then he mysteriously died of a heart attack in prison. But yeah, he went away. Skilling, I think, Jeffrey Skilling, I think was his name. And then it also, as I said, protects whistleblowers from retaliation when they reveal information about unethical or wrongful action. So when I was working in the telecom industry and this came out, our VP of finance, right, at our division got really nervous. I'm like, what are you nervous about, Bob? And I knew the answer to it because I knew to make the budget every month, right, at the end of the month, we did some pretty, questionable things, right? Pulling tax credits forward and stuff that you can't do. I'm like, well, that's your name on it, right? You need to make sure you get it right. So that's the Sarbanes-Oxley issue. And then corporate social responsibility, a couple of things that we've seen on the exam, right? We have really, it's the idea that corporations should be involved in programs that contribute to the well-being of its stakeholders, such as maybe helping the poor, improving the environment, contributing to charities. That's corporate social responsibility. So when I was with Time Warner, our big one was United Way. We donate a lot to United Way. When we got bought by Charter, it was like a Habitat for Humanity. Went in and built homes and repaired homes for in low income neighborhoods or neighborhoods that were at need. I think Fox Sports does something where they gather sports equipment for underserved neighborhoods, right? So, you look at that, and the ethics question that has come up around it is some companies do their corporate social responsibility and they just do it. They don't tout it. They get employees together, they go do, they give, and they just do it because it's the right thing to do. Okay. Other companies like Charter will advertise, Fox Sports, right, will promote this is what we're doing in the communities. And at the end of the day, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this. I have had people say, well, you're building all those homes or you're giving that sports equipment, right? You're just trying to promote yourself to get more business. And at the end of the day, right, probably, okay, you're going in and you're helping those communities and neighborhoods, and you while you are giving back, you are hoping that has a return for you. Some would say that's unethical. Some would say you're giving like a tithe at church should be private and not telling everybody, right? I think as long as you're doing it honestly, right, and you want to tell people what you're doing, if that resonates with someone, say, hey, I want to do business with someone who gives back to the community, I think that's okay. But again, ethics perspective, right? You might have some folks that go, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I don't know if I'm comfortable. So sometimes you can do something that you think's really good, might not necessarily have that impact. So understand what that looks like and how that is engaged in organizations for the exam. And then the call roundtable on 168. At the end of the day, right, this is an international organization of experienced senior business executives, and they're aiming to promote ethical business practices, and a principled approach to global capitalism. So there are 7 principles. So at the end of the day, what is it? It's really a guideline that these experienced business executives put together to say, if everybody follows these principles, we will have a much better world to live in from a business perspective, right? Now, if you follow them, great. If you don't, no one's going to knock on your door. You're not going to get a letter. There is no law or rule. It is really just recommendations. So principle 1, really about respecting stakeholders beyond shareholders, right? That is not just people that own the stock, it's the communities you serve, it's the vendors you work with, right? Everybody who has a vested interest in that business succeeding, right? Maybe more so now than ever when inflation's just running out of control, right? Principle 2 is contribute to economic, social, and environmental development in the markets that you serve, okay? 3, build trust by going beyond the letter of the law, right? What's the spirit of the law versus just the letter? And ethics policy, are we doing the right things at the right time? And where are we tempted, do we just walk away from that, right? There was a big case study I did back in my graduate school days years ago that it was this drug company there was some disease like malaria, right? Something in a third world nation that was killing millions of people. And this drug company figured out had a solution to it. But the problem was the country or the people had no money to buy the drug. And so, there was a lot of investment in it. And so you say, build trust, by going down the ladder law or contribute to environmental development, right? The ethics question was, what does this pharmaceutical company do? Do they say, you know what, we got a lot of money, but we're going to sell it? Or do they just do the right thing and save people's lives? And at the end of the day, they said, you know what, we just gave it to them because that it's a world we live in, and yeah, we didn't make any money off it, but we saved lives, and who knows where that comes back to us, right? From other areas. Hey, I will buy your other pharmaceuticals because you did the right thing. Respect rules and conventions, right? So think about like labor laws, right? A lot of the shoe manufacturing companies got in trouble for that years ago, where they were basically had horrible working conditions and child labor, like in India and Pakistan and some of those markets. Well, we wouldn't do that here, right? So, respect the rules and conventions, but go beyond the letter of the law and do the right things for people. Support responsible globalization, respect the environment, then avoid illicit activities at all costs. So that's the call roundtable. Knowledge check. Normally I do it, just pop your answer in chat. You can either give it to everyone or me privately, but just give me an A, B, C, or D. So let's go to you're on it, right? A vendor that provides services for a company offers to send a company employee and her family to Disneyland. The employee should A, accept the offer in an effort to strengthen business relationships. B, decline the offer because it's conflict of interest. C, allow the vendor to pay for travel expenses, but not park admission fees, right? That is called rationalization. And then stop doing business with the vendor. What would you say? Yeah, at the end of the day, the answer is B, decline the offer because it is a conflict of interest. I could even possibly say, depending on the situation, you might want to stop doing business with the vendor, right? That could be a second answer. I'll give you a quick example. I hope this isn't offensive, but I want to give it to you because it's real, right? And it happened, and goes to show you the ethics issue, right? And this is where I think D would be. Stop doing business with the vendor. When I was in the cable system, we had what we call billing system, right? Everything, a CRM, everything that housed customer information. And we were on one system, and we were doing a gap analysis, and we were trying to figure out, okay, this is what we're going to need going forward. So we put that out to bid. So we put it out to bid to the current vendor. And then we had it down to one other vendor that was bidding. And so the IT director was a good friend of mine, and we were always in the office early in the morning. And he walked in one morning, and he was just white as a sheet. And Tom was, at that time, he was really close to retirement. So he was just white as a sheet. And I'm like, what happened? He says, you're never going to believe this story. So, and at the time, it was okay, right? Vendors would come in, take us out to dinner, talk business. That was perfectly acceptable in the industry. We don't do that nearly as much anymore, but it was. So that wasn't the problem. And so he was talking to the current vendor, took him to this real nice steakhouse, and was sitting there. And Tom just happened to know, it was like a Tuesday night, so it wasn't busy, that there was a single young lady sitting at the bar. And Tom had several daughters, so just thought, that's kind of interesting, right? Just sitting there by yourself on a Tuesday night. And so the vendor says, hey, I've got to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. So vendor gets up and leaves. And then after a couple of minutes, this young lady comes over to the table and addresses my friend and says, hey, do you mind if I, is this seat taken? He goes, no, do you mind if I sit down? I don't see your friend coming back. And so Tom, being wily and smart, he said, you know what? No offense, but let me stop you right there. He said, are you a working girl lady this evening? And she goes, yes. And he said, why did you come to this table? Just give me an idea. He said, well, your friend you're having dinner with hired me to provide, an evening for you. And he says, well, I'm sure you're a wonderful young lady. I'm married happily. That's not going to happen. Goodbye. And so she left and he left. That's an example of ethics, right? He came in and said the vendor bought me a prostitute to try to get my business. And Tom, being the wonderful human being he is, was horribly offended. I was offended. And we, in this case, D, stopped doing business with the vendor. They did not get the bid. And I'm like, they probably weren't going to get it anyway, but they sure in the heck weren't going to get it after that episode. I mean, it was terrible, right? But that's the other vendor had a much better product. So I suppose he felt that he had to relate to that. But, wow, that's, yeah. So, so Joy, you said you've seen a lot of the other thing in private sector. Have you run into that one yet? Tom was insulted, and we ended up, I think, not doing business with that vendor across the company eventually. I mean, it was just terrible, but that's ethics at work, right? Bottom line wins. All right, so we're through that module. Now we're going to look at research, HR research and analytics, page 173 to 191. Take us through here the end of the evening, and I'm going to scratch the surface on some things. Some of this you're going to come back to in greater detail in Unit 3. So I'll give you the highlights here, and then we're going to go through that in more detail. So our learning objectives here, we want to describe the 4 research design methods and explain the advantages of each in different circumstances. So research design, what we're trying to say is the treatment that we're doing for employees having the intended outcome, right? Do we know if what we're doing is working or not? That's really what we're looking at here. We want to differentiate between quantitative and qualitative research deliverables and illustrate through examples the 7 types of experimental designs relative to reliability and validity. So HR research, right? At the end of the day, I think this is an area that we've gotten better with this in HR, but we still have a long way to go in terms of really putting muscle behind measuring what we're doing and tying that back directly to the business. That are we having an impact? Not just talking in HR terms, but really talking truly in those business terms. And so we can contribute to better management decisions through an effective research program. And you do that with both quantitative data, number, statistics, and qualitative research, right? Case studies, things that are more ethereal in these research designs to answer important questions, right? And so things that we might want to look at. Do we know if our recruiting strategy is being effective? Okay. Right. What's the duration of the retention? How are these folks performing versus others, so forth? We want to look at the validity of selection procedure. Are our interviews valid, right? If not, then we run the risk of being sued for disparate impact, right? The value of an incentive compensation program. Are we paying more out? Are we getting for it? Are we paying more out and getting the same as we were before, maybe less? The cause of increased grievances or customer complaint or employee complaints. And then really, I think one of the big ones, and this is where we'll focus some time and why we go back to more of it, Unit 3, is, right, is our training having an impact on the bottom line? When I took that over at Time Warner, we were running the B2B side, right? I got in and I said, how's our training doing to impact the business? And they're like, hey, our L1s are great. People love the class. I said, I'm sure they are, but do we know if the training's impacting the business? Our L1s are great, man. They're 4.8 out of 5. They love it. I said, I get they love the class, but do we know, right? Because I've been through several classes that I loved and didn't do anything for me, right? In terms of my business abilities. So the answer was, we have no idea. I said, okay, well, that's fair. Now we need to figure out, right? And that's what you want to try to do with some research designs and metrics to see, is what you're doing, the treatment, having an impact on the organization? Is it having a neutral impact, right? We spent $4 million a year in training and it was no different than when they came out. Not good, right? Or worse, right? They're performing worse than when they went in. Or, right, are they, in the case when we did our new hire and started tracking it, they're performing they're getting productive 30% quicker at a 30% higher output, right? All things else being equal, no change in compensation, right? No price increases, decreases. That training worked, right? There's a direct cause and effect of that training treatment. That's what we're trying to look at when you look at research designs. So really starting at a broad level, right? The scientific method then, and you're not going to have to calculate any of this for the exam, and I'll kind of tell you where you need to hone in on and which ones for the exam. So understand at the essence these, right? The scientific method involves a systematic approach of developing and testing new ideas, right? So, hey, I got a new idea for a training program. I got a new idea for a recruiting strategy. Before we go full board, does it work? Let's see. So it consists of stating a theory, right? If we do this, this is what I think will happen. And then you test it to say, is that theory true, right? So some of the major characteristics of scientific method that distinguish it include the use of hypotheses, which is really a prediction. If we do this, this is what I think is going to happen. I'm hypothesizing that if we raise commissions, right, that we're going to sell more units. Okay, well, sometimes you raise commissions and you didn't sell any more units, then that theory, that hypothesis proved that didn't work, right? People just made more money selling the same thing. Why put on any more effort when I can make what I'm making now, right? Well, now you might have to change the structure. That's what we're looking at here. Constructs then, which is the relationship between objects and events, and then observations, which are used to draw conclusions. I watched this. We raised commissions. We thought it would drive more sales, and all it did was people sold the same amount and they just made more for it. So we went in the hole. Not good. I observed that. Now, what do we need to do? If they sell more than they did last time, right? Or let's say 10 units is average, then we're going to pay you more for unit 11 on, right? That should now drive more sales. Go back and observe and said, okay, we changed the construct. Yeah, that did it, right? People were getting $100 for the first 10, but it was $200 on all of them starting at 11. Well, now we started to move the needle on selling more. Visually, I could see that happened. So, you know, what you're really trying to do with the scientific method is have some idea of what you want to do, why you're doing it, what you think the outcome was, and then test it, right? You don't want to go change everyone's commission and realize, no, we just paid another $2 million, right? And we got the same number of output. Not good. Okay. So there are modeling programs that can help with that as well. So that was the scientific method. The experimental design then embraces really 4 different methods of to diagnose problems. So you've got a case study, walk through each of these, field survey, field experiment, and lab experiment. So think about this as a funnel, right? Case study is very general, gets very specific down in a lab experiment. So a case study, also referred to as observational research method, you observe and make interpretations which drive conclusions. I see this happening. This is what I think we should do. Harvard teaches pretty much exclusively in their business school with case studies, right? So not a lot of scientific method around it. Field survey then is also referred to as a correlation research method. And this is where you gather data from subjects in an uncontrolled environment and then you pair related variables. So you're starting to put some more rigor around it. A field experiment is similar to a field survey, but intentionally adapts an independent variable, therefore controlling an aspect of the outcome, something you know you can keep constant. And then a lab experiment is a controlled setting made up of standardized tests, right? Where everything is controlled, right? If you think about, if any of you watched the movie that just came out on Netflix not too long ago this year, Spiderhead, right? It was about kind of that lab experiment, everything he did with testing these medications, albeit unethically and illicitly, was in a controlled environment to take notes. We did this, we did this, we did this at this time, this situation, this was the outcome. Where a field survey is just very less granular, right? We get data from subjects in general in the population, and we look at things and say on this group and this group and this group of people, here's what we saw. We're making some correlation that, right, that that this is what happened, and we don't know if there were, we don't have any other control factors. So if it was a random group, what have you. But again, what you're trying to do is get some idea of what we think is going on, what's happening, and how to do it, right? So my experience has been, right, that these two have been more of what I've experienced in the telecom world. And when you do, though, get into maybe like pharmaceutical companies or other companies that are pretty big, you might end up seeing much more of this type of stuff from an HR perspective. So research designs. At the end of the day, what I want you to remember, and you're going to go through this more in Unit 3, is that the Solomon 4-group design is the preferred design to measure the impact of training effectiveness. I've seen that on multiple exams, so put that one in your notes and commit it to memory. So let me walk through a couple of these with you, right? So first, I always laugh. I think this looks like a play a coach drew up at a timeout or halftime, right? So first, X is a treatment, okay? So think about a treatment as, in this case, we're going to use training, as a training class that you went through. You went through something developed, and then O is the result or the outcome, okay? So post-test only, this is the case study method. I go through the training, I take the test, and then did I pass it or did I fail it, right? That's what you're looking at. Now, the problem with the post-test design is you've got nothing to know. You might have got 80, 90, percent, 100% on the test, but you don't know, did it have any impact? People might have actually gotten 100% of the test before they went through the class. You don't know. You don't have that treatment. That's a lot how our new hire was, right? We had new hires come out and they were taking the test, and if they passed it, they went to work. If they didn't, they didn't. And then there's a whole other thing we're going to get into, that if you're testing people, you need to make sure that the test is reliable, repeatability of the results over time, and it's actually measuring what it says it will, right? You're gonna make performance, like promotions, firing based on, or hiring, right, based on testing. You need to make sure that's reliable and valid. So that's post-test only. Pre-test, post-test then is a little bit different, right? So we were doing some our sales clients came to us in the talent development side and said, hey, we really want you to give our group advanced product training. So they had a very high level, but these were sophisticated telecom products, and said, we want you to put a 2-day advanced course together. I said, okay. So my instructional designer and I were talking, and he goes, well, we got to figure out what they know first, right? Otherwise we put 2 days of stuff together and they knew it all. So we had worked with the client on what they wanted. We tested this. We took a random group of people. We tested them on this advanced product knowledge before they went to the class. And I think we had a 58% pass rate, not good, i.e. why we needed to do the training. We took them through the 2-day, whatever, we had like several products, 2-day per product. We just did it in one, whatever, I didn't remember what the product was. Took them through the 2-day training. They came out, we tested them again, we had a 98% pass rate. So therefore we knew, right, that treatment was moving the needle in terms of knowledge. Now, what pre-test, post-test, and any of these still don't do is tell you, are they actually doing a different behavior, and can they apply it to the bottom line? And you'll get more into that in Unit 3. But that pre-test, post-test was good. We want to know what you know before you go in, test, and then come out. And so then we jump to the Solomon 4-group design. I'm just going to go here for the interest of time. Is the R stands for random. So you have 4 groups of random people. Let's say it's 10 people each. That's a random group. And in the Solomon 4-group design, then you can start to see you've got one group that is random. They get tested beforehand, they go through the treatment, and they get tested again. Ultimately, this should be your best group, okay, because they're receiving everything. You got a second group then that is random. They get tested and they get tested again, but they don't get the treatment. The third group is random, right? And like the post-test only, you have a random group, you put them through the training, you test them, and you see what the outcome is, okay? And then you got a fourth group that's just random, and you give them a test without any training, and you see what the results are. So what you're hoping is that this group right here has the best scores, right? This group right here probably should have the second best, and then you're probably going to end up third best here because people say, well, let me remember that, and then fourth best. If this group comes back, right, with an all A's, and this group had all A's, well, then you know that your treatment was pretty bad, right? It didn't work. This should be the group that has the highest results. So a couple things to consider. I never got to do the pretest, the Solomon 4-group design, because in the world I lived in, my clients were not going to give me 4 random groups of people to test that. We did the pretest, post-test, we looked at stats, so we had an idea, but I never got the ability to do it. The second thing you need to be careful about with Solomon 4-group design is R means random, and that does mean random. I had asked for a random group from the sales team once to test something. We were actually gonna do the pretest, post-test, and I knew the people, and I canceled the training, but he sent me his 12 best performers. I'm like, that's not random, right? They're probably gonna crush the pretest and the post-test. I'm not gonna know, did that move the needle? We ended up just drawing names out of a hat randomly, and then we got that group. So really making sure random means random. And you'll go through this in greater detail in Unit 3, but please understand that this is the one Solomon 4-group design that is preferred for measuring the effectiveness of training applications. Questions on any of that before I move forward? All right, I'll keep going. So at the end of the day, then you got to observe what's happening, right? And so you got to look at how am I going to know if this worked? And so, right, there are ways you can have archive data, or as I like to call it, the business data. And I gave you the example of how we took new hires under the new curriculum. They got productive 30% quicker at a 30% higher level. We actually look at the customer metrics to measure that, right? So that's what I would call archive data. It wasn't just HR data we were looking at. It's like, what were each of these, we're using the customer data. It might be observations, right? If I taught you new negotiation skills, how do I know you'll use them? I might ride along with you in the field and watch. Okay, might be interviews with employees, might be questionnaires, some combination of all of it. My experience tells me that the more you can use customer data, your internal customers, the data they look at, to incorporate that in what you're measuring, you are miles ahead. Otherwise, you bring these ethereal numbers that don't mean anything to them if you lost them, right? When anyone wanted to measure something, I was on the business side, use my data, I'm not going to pay attention to it because it doesn't matter. That's what I'm held accountable for. And then really the observation, being able to physically watch and look at what's happening. Now I might use interviews and questionnaires to get some feedback on, what could we have added, maybe where isn't it helping you, right? But when you're really looking at the hardcore, those are the ones that you want to look at. And then I mentioned reliability and validity a little bit earlier, and understanding the difference and yet close-knit relationship between these two is really important. And we're going to see this again in Module 2. So I'm going to touch on it here at a high level. We'll go into it more in Unit 2. Reliability then refers to the consistency or repeatability of a measure, right? Consider the example they give you here is a scale. You can step on a scale day after day, week after week, and constantly be told you are the same weight. You could be so lucky, right? We would then say that the scale is reliable since it's delivering a consistent and repeated measure. I don't necessarily like that example, because what if you gain 10 pounds and the scale still tells you you didn't, right? It's lying to you. So, think about reliability as the sun, right? Let's say the sun sets tonight at 8:47 Eastern time. Well, what time is it right now, right? It's say it sets at 8:56 Eastern time. Next year, same day, that sun's going to set at about 8:56 Eastern time, give or take a few seconds. That's reliability. It's the consistency or repeatability of a measure over time. So when we're looking at reliability in terms of test scores, right? Are you on, if you got one new hire class that got a 99, they average 99% pass rate, the next new hire class average 55, the next new hire class 68. That's not necessarily reliable because you're getting all sorts of scores. Now, you have to look, could you have just made a really, really good group of hires in the first one? Possibly, probably not. But you want something that is repeatability of the measure. Then validity, on the other hand, is concerned with whether the instrument actually measures what it's supposed to be measuring, right? Imagine the scale is not calibrated in our first example. While you may be getting reliable measure, the scale is not valid because it is not doing what it's supposed to do, right? So think about validity is you're sending people through training to speak, to learn Italian, and you give them a Spanish test when they're done. That is not a valid test because it's not measuring what it said. Oh, well, we're measuring Italian, but I'm giving you a Spanish test, right? It's not measurable. So something can be reliable and not valid, but it cannot be valid if it's not reliable, right? So you can have a reliability of the same results over time, right? Might be given someone who's learning Italian a Spanish test, and every group gets a less than 10% pass rate. Hey, this is a reliable test. Problem is it's not valid, it's not measuring what it says it will. And so if you're looking at this reliability and validity, your hiring instruments, your interviews, your selection process, in particular pre-employment testing, right? If you're doing a lot of pre-employment testing, it must be reliable and valid. And if a group, an organization cannot show you the reliability and validity report, then run away from that, because you are on the hook if that is not. And that can end up causing disparate impact and all sorts of different things. All right, so statistics, not my favorite thing in college. Didn't like it, still don't like it, but need to understand it and find people who do like it and can make it happen, right? So quantifiable statistics are very helpful, not only in delivering results, but really in forecasting as well. At the end of the day, you're looking like a regression analysis to determine, was your hiring, practice right? So descriptive statistics are used to summarize data in meaningful ways so the results can be used to make decisions. Here's the data. What's the story it's telling? Give it to me in terms that I can understand. Differential statistics then are used to make inferences about a larger population of people when data has been obtained from only a small sample, right? So I'm sampling 10 people on, do they like Coke better than Pepsi? And 8 out of 10 said they did. So then I'm inferring that of the entire population of the United States, 80% prefer Coke over Pepsi. Well, that's not going to be right when you get up to the Northeast and even some parts of the Carolinas where Pepsi was born. That's not the case. So that's inferential. You're making a larger assumption based on a smaller amount. Under inferential statistics, a simple random sample method then is an inferential statistic method of pulling a sample at random. Literally just you're pulling 10 people off the street at random. A stratified random sample then involves categorizing subjects based on characteristics, and then random selections are made from which inferences are later composed, okay? So it might be, if I'm going to, instead of interviewing sellers, I might interview account managers, and then out of account managers, pull them from random. So that's a stratified random sample. Correlation and regression, right? Again, we're going to see more of this in Unit 2. Going to give you the precursor tonight. A correlation, the book does, I think, a pretty good job of explaining it, but a correlation of 0.0 indicates that there is no relationship at all between the variables, right? You got an apple and you got a hammer. Now, you could say there's a relationship to both objects, right? One's a fruit, an orange, the other one's an inanimate carpenter tool, right? No correlation. While a correlation that approaches plus or minus 1 indicates the variables are either positively or negatively related. And navel orange and a blood orange, high correlation, both fruit, both oranges, slight differences, right? So that's what you're looking at in correlations. A positive correlation coefficient close to +1 indicates that individuals who have high scores on one variable, right, they will then tend to have high scores on the other variable, while individuals who have low scores on one variable tend to be low on both, right? Correlation, high on one, high on another, low on one, low on another. A negative correlation coefficient suggests that individuals with high scores on one variable tend to have low scores on the other and vice versa. I did really high here, but now I did low over here. And I did low over here, but I did high over here, right? A regression analysis then is the pairing of a dependent variable with several independent variables, and each of the independent variables hold a weight or magnitude towards the dependent variable, right? You're not going to have to calculate that. Many independent variables will help predict the dependent variable. For the exam, you need to know, or at least recently, right, that a regression analysis is one of the best tools for measuring the effectiveness of a recruiting strategy, right? So correlation is one variable having an impact another, and what can we draw from that? And then really the last couple things I want to share with you tonight, and I'm a big fan of this, right, is when you're presenting data about the results of something you've done, training effectiveness, right, recruiting, and there's lots of numbers, when presenting it to an executive, be able to tell that story of the data, but present it in a manner through some type of graphic display that allows them to quickly determine what the data says, but focus on what you're saying. I've seen so many people go in with 600 words on a slide and lines and charts that either you just they get shut down because they can't digest it all, or they're looking at numbers and they're not listening to you tell the story. So how, if you can find someone or you have the skill to do it, really look at doing things from a graphical perspective. So histogram, right? This is an illustration of quantitative data within ranges for groups or intervals. For example, it might be student test scores within a class, right? So you can see them. You have 25 students at 100%, right? So forth and so on. Column chart, distinct categories comparing data for test scores, maybe between classes, right? So you might say, hey, or this is what our absenteeism was on Monday. Here's what it was on Tuesday, Wednesday, so forth and so on. Right? Column chart's a good way to show cars that are manufactured on Fridays and Mondays have more defects and recalls and shop visits on cars manufactured on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. People are hungover from the weekend, just don't want to get back to work, or they're ready to get out of there Friday and then cut corners, right? That would be a good way to share that information. A bar chart, really similar to a column chart, but allows for splitting negative values. A good example might be passing test scores versus failing test scores. Pie chart really gives you the ability to show percentages, right? So, you add those numbers up, it's 100, right? I was doing this with the client the other day and saying, show your leader visually where the bulk of your work is, and he did, and it was like just maintenance. It was like the 70%, and just take that 25 and make it red. And the leader was shocked. He's like, really? And I said, yeah. And then all the other stuff we really should be doing was 30% broken down. And here's the stuff we're not even getting to, right? We were able to tell a story with mounds of data in one little chart that changed everything about the conversation. A line graph then is an illustration of continuous data and comparison of activities. For example, practice test unit 1, first attempt, second attempt, third attempt, and so forth. First attempt lower, second attempt higher, and so forth. And then dual axis chart is a blend between column chart and line chart, illustrating the relationship between the data, right? Think about, might be, for example, performance on a practice test versus the actual test, right? Very similar to, so neither one of these are right or wrong. Oh, sorry, I had to sneeze. Right, but finding what tells the story best. You're going to go through all that research design to get this incredible data to tell your story, be able to captivate people and look at what's the best way to do that. A couple others to look at is scatter plot, right? So this is really good if you think about this, and you'll see this in Unit 4, right? Let's say this is salaries, right? Everybody's salary, right? And so you've got, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and here's the percent. What you want to look at with the scatter plot is this is the ideal, your pay grade, right? This is the bottom 20%, top 20%. You want the majority of people in here. You can use a scatter plot. If you've got people as many outside as you got inside, then we either have that too tight, or we've got some issues, and you can start to see, why do you have outliers? If you had, let's say this is scatter plot and this was your pay ranges, well, now you've got everybody inside, you've got 3 outliers here. Well, you can go find out that's probably okay, right? There are some things here. So that's the way you would use a scatter plot. Venn diagram illustrates overlapping elements, right? So what you're looking at here, what's overlapping, better maybe known as the sweet spot, right? So good example of Venn diagram might be the PHR, I can't write with my mouth, and the APHR exams, and then this is the content that is shared between them, right? So I'll give you a good example of Venn diagram. And lastly, then really a Gantt chart, perfect for project management, right? This is task 1. It's going to run from May 21st through May 24th. Task 2 starts on May 21st, runs through May 28th, and so forth, and who's responsible. So it really is a good way to show this is what's going to happen in detail, and how long everything's going to take in addition to the ones that are individuals, right? I can look at any task. I can look, this project starts May 21, and by June 4th, right, we should be done. Okay, pretty tight project, but I can see who's responsible for what and for where. And our last knowledge check for tonight, which of the following best describes how constructs should be used in the scientific method? This was out of the book. Is it specific and operationally defined? So the word here is in the scientific method, right? So you're probably looking at stuff that's very controlled and specific. Is it B, loosely controlled and ambiguous, right? Maybe more like a field survey, just it is what it is. Rich with surplus meaning, or intuitive in general? What do you say? It's a tough one. I didn't get this one right first time either. Joy, I love your honesty. Thank you. Hey, at least you committed to an answer. And sometimes folks just, that's the thing in the exam. At some point, you gotta get it down. You can come back and reference it. I've had people that, before told me they didn't finish the exam because they couldn't come make a decision and come back and revisit it. Yeah, the answer is A, right? It's very, A, thanks, Jennifer. Very specific and operationally defined, right? So the explanation here, constructs must be operationally defined to make them specific and empirical, right? So what you're trying to do scientifically is say, for sure, if I'm giving you this drug, the result is this, right? Or I'm giving this test, here's the result. An operational definition consists of defining a construct by specifying the operation and activity involved in measuring it. So specific and operationally defined just means you're putting rigor around it to really know, is it having an impact and you're controlling that in the environment. So well done. All right, that's our time for tonight. Any questions about anything that we covered, or anything from Unit 1, anything on the exam? in general. Been doing this for now almost 3 years, seen a lot of people come through. Glad to answer any questions, or you think of something, just reach out to me an email. I'm glad to chat with you, or if you want a one-on-one session or anything we can do to help, I'll be glad to. There hasn't been, Jennifer, in the caveat from since I've been doing this since 2000, early 2020, I've not seen anything outside of just basically what we covered tonight. So no statistic calculation. Yeah, me too. I just that just is not how I think, right? So no, the hardest calculation you'll have in the exam will be a pretty simple overtime calculation from my experience, from what I've seen the last 2 years and what I took. And then you'll probably have an adverse impact or disparate impact calculation, but they'll be really simple stuff you could probably do in your head, but you'll have an online calculator to do that as well. Yeah, statistics. I have a hard enough time spelling it, let alone doing it. So I'm right there with you, Jennifer. Any other questions, anybody? Well, it's been an honor spending a few minutes with you tonight. I appreciate you letting me hold court tonight. Hopefully JD will be feeling better and back next week. Also encourage you, when you're done with Unit 1, you'll all have the opportunity to start joining the Coaches Corners. Jennifer and I do the majority of those. We do them on Sunday evening, where we'll go do like a deeper dive in a half hour in a subject. Please stop by. We've got a few of those coming up once you're through your unit. In fact, you might actually be done with Unit 1 tonight. You'll be able to start to go to the Coaches Corner. So just, hey, I was in group 19, and say, hey, if you're in my classes, I'm glad to have you join us there on Sunday nights as well. And if you don't make them live, they are recorded as well. So you'll see some information coming out in that shortly. All right, everybody, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. And as I always tell my group, I want you to remember one thing: you've got this. That's my triathlon, my ultra running coach always said, you've got this. You're going to crush your exams. You're going to do great. You've got this. So it's been a pleasure. If you have any questions, email me, and I wish you nothing but the best. And hopefully we'll talk again sometime in the near future. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Take care.